Hi, everybody. This is Dr. David Branham. Today, I'm taking advantage of the nice weather outside to do a video outside. Today's video is on United States foreign policy. The PowerPoint that comes with this video that is being presented in this video will be provided to you so that you can use it to study or anything you might want to do. Okay, so let me share my screen and we'll get to the PowerPoint. This is about United States foreign policy, and we're going to start with the countries with the highest military expenditures in the world. We just want to look at this so that we can get a good idea of what the United States does when it comes to military spending. As you can see, the United States far outspends any other country in military spending. Of the top 10, over half or eight, or excuse me, out of the top 8, 6 of the 8 spend less than 10% of what the United States does on military spending. This is a 2020 chart. We're now well over $800 billion a year in spending, which is about 3 times what China spends. And China has 4 times as many people as the United States does. So when it comes to military spending per person, the United States is far ahead of anybody else in the world. A couple of things I want to point out. When China is number 2, everybody else is far, far behind because China spends about 3 times more than the next country, which is India. So you can see that China and the United States lead in military spending. The one thing that China does more than the United States is military manpower. The people who are in the military, among people in the military, the China far exceeds the United States in the number of people in the military. So the men and women who serve in the military in China they do it far more often than the United States. The United States has used this technology to make it easy to not have so many soldiers, especially those with feet on the ground, because in all honesty, the United States just doesn't tolerate it very well when we lose soldiers. So the United States, although they spend a lot of that spending isn't on actual soldiers, people in the military. Another thing you should notice is that of the 8 countries here, only China and Russia are real adversaries of the United States. The rest of them are allies. Sometimes we have a little bit of controversial relationship, for instance, with Saudi Arabia, where we have issues with what they do. But Germany and France and United Kingdom, India, we've had good relations with those countries for a while. So we overall are in a good position militarily with most of the countries. And those 2 countries, China and Russia, are our 2 main concerns all the time because they're the biggest threat to the United States. The other thing I want to point out is that the United States is the only country on this list in the Western Hemisphere. We don't have anyone in the Western Hemisphere who's a real military power. The closest one is Brazil, which is in South America, far to the south of us. So we have the benefit of being isolated with oceans between us and the countries that we most fear. The Pacific Ocean is a big blockade for most of those, most of that country, the countries that we have real concerns with. The same with the Atlantic Ocean. We are so isolated that it geographically is a big advantage for us. So our 2 biggest adversaries, as I said in the previous slide, are China and Russia. And China is our biggest adversary now, bigger than Russia, because China's confrontation with us is more than military. It's economic. China wants to replace us as the economic power of the world. And though they have a big military that is a threat to us. So our biggest adversary now is China. Our second biggest adversary is Russia. And if you look at the previous page, it seems like Russia is an average country when it comes to military spending. But that military spending has focused a lot on technology, and it's been very well spent as far as giving them the weapons to do mass destruction. Russia can do nuclear war, has a good nuclear arsenal that they can attack with. They also have hypersonic missiles, which are incredibly fast and incredibly powerful. So the money that Russia does spend gives them the ability to do a lot of damage. So those are by far our two biggest adversaries with significant threat to us as a country, the United States. The adversaries with significant threat to our allies, the two biggest ones are Iran and North Korea. Iran has been our adversary in the United States ever since the 1940s. Now, I say they have been. For a while, we had very good relations with Iran and the leadership of Iran but the reason why is because we actually installed the dictator there. So we had good relationships with him when he was in power. So when that dictator was replaced, then Iran went back to an adversarial relationship with the United States. And they've always had an adversarial relationship with the United States on some level. They have always had. We've always feared that they would have a nuclear buildup. Our biggest fear is that they could attack other countries in the Middle East, mainly Israel, which is their biggest threat and one of the United States' biggest allies. We'll go over that in a minute. But that is the biggest worry about Iran, is that they could build up a nuclear arsenal. They have a lot of oil in their country, so they are not a poor country by far. They also have a lot of human rights abuses in Iran that the United States is concerned about. So they are a big adversary. They're not a big threat to the United States as a country. We are not going to see them in our borders or throwing missiles into our country. At least not right now. That's not the threat. The threat is to the area around them that the United States is concerned about. The other one is North Korea, because North Korea's military buildup has been nuclear, and Kim Jong-un has been very aggressive in creating powerful weapons and then showing them off to the countries around them. He's the countries around them are Taiwan. Taiwan is actually a part of China, but it acts as a democratic country. Also South Korea, right to their south, which, this conflict has been going on since the Korean War ended in the 1950s. South Korea is now a major democratic country with incredible infrastructure, incredibly rich in comparison to North Korea. North Korea is very poor. Their leadership has isolated them. The leadership has taken all the money and invested it in nuclear weapons and things for the leadership. North Korea is a very oppressive country, and so we consider them a threat to their people. But in bigger way, we consider them a threat to South Korea, China, Japan, those American allies that surround them. Now, South Korea and Japan, they are military powers as well. Well, little noise over there with the sirens. South Korea and Japan, those are military powers as well. You'll see that they have a lot of military buildup, and they are able to protect themselves. But when you have nuclear weapons going off and shooting up into there like North Korea does, there's always the fear that North Korea will do something very, very rash, and it'll cause a lot of destruction in the area. So Iran and North Korea are significant threats to U.S. allies. Adversarial relationships, adversaries that are not a significant threat to the United States. Afghanistan, we pulled out of Afghanistan. Joe Biden did as soon as he became president. When he did that, the Taliban took over, and the Taliban is very, very oppressive especially to the women in their country. They don't let the women be educated. They've restricted education by women. Things have changed very negatively for women in Afghanistan since the pullout. So that's a problem for a lot of people in the United States. Venezuela, when it became a socialist country, we started having a very antagonistic history, especially when Hugo Chavez was president. The fact that they're a socialist country and they feel that the United States is aggressive towards them, and they've cut off relations with the United States. That's been a problem. They're not a military threat to us, just like Afghanistan isn't a military threat to us, but it has been an issue. And the same with Syria and the Assad portion of the country. I say that portion of the country because if you look at a map of Syria, it's really three countries in one, and the lines are not real clear. You have the Kurds to the north, you have Assad's regime in the southwest, and it's a country that's very divided. But it is constantly been an issue with the United States, especially because of its nearness to Israel, and once again, it's a threat to Israel. So those are three countries we constantly have a concern for, even though they're not really a military threat to the United States. High tension relationships. We have two countries where we get along with, that we have high tension relationships with. Saudi Arabia, for instance, it's a major oil producer. The United States gets a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia. They control OPEC, a big portion of OPEC, so they control the supply of oil, and they can very easily cut that supply and cause gas prices to go up. So we need to have that relationship with Saudi Arabia to maintain our petroleum infrastructure. But sometimes Saudi Arabia does things that are very distasteful to people of the United States. The biggest one was the assassination of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. When that happened, he was a journalist. He was very critical of the country. When he entered the embassy, he never came out. He was basically assassinated, and his life was taken away from him. The United States has had an issue with that. A lot of people from the United States have an issue with that, and so they have a distaste in their mouth about allowing that to happen, and then going on with life, and saying it's okay, and still dealing with Saudi Arabia in the same way. Pakistan also has that long history of distrust with the United States. Although strategically, it's nice for us to get along. They're in a very strategic area, right in between India and Afghanistan, and so we want to have a relationship with Pakistan. For instance, we gave them billions of dollars after 9/11 in an attempt to make sure that Osama bin Laden would be captured, and that we can have access to getting rid of those groups. In the end, it was Osama bin Laden who spent years and years probably in Pakistan, and we found him in Pakistan when he was finally captured and assassinated. So we have that kind of distrust with Pakistan, even though they're important to us as a country. So that's what I call a high tension relationship that we have with them. Pakistan is a nuclear power as well. They have a big military, maybe a top 10 military, and they have India right next door, which they've had a very adversarial relationship with as well. So it is a very tension-filled part of the world, that Middle East, all the way from India, which I don't really consider part of the Middle East, but India all the way over to Egypt is a high-tension area, and it's always of concern. And right in the middle of that is that little country of Israel. So the U.S. allies are NATO, Israel, Ukraine, South Korea, and Japan, Taiwan. We have many more allies than these, but I just want to cover these because these are probably the most important. NATO is a 30-plus country pact. NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, where we basically have these 30 or so countries. When I'm making this, we're at 31. But it's the number is changing. So NATO is basically a pact or a treaty where each NATO country declares that an attack on any NATO country is an attack on all NATO countries. As you can imagine, especially to a country like Russia, if you look at that map there, all those light blue and dark blue countries are NATO countries. And those NATO countries are right next to Russia. And the one country that's in between, you have Belarus and, two countries, Belarus and Ukraine, are basically a defense for Russia. Now, Belarus is clearly an ally of Russia, so that's not a problem. But Ukraine was not. And Ukraine, that was the biggest issue, I think, with Putin attacking is he wanted that coverage. He went into Crimea in 2016 when Obama was president. Excuse me, it was before that, but it was when Obama was president and took Crimea without pretty much firing a shot. So I think they were thinking the same thing could happen in Ukraine, but Ukraine fought back, and so the Ukraine war is a big mess, and it was a way for Russia to declare we have a wall between us and the NATO countries, and the United States is thinking if he's going into Ukraine, he's probably going to go into the NATO countries as well. Sorry, I got a car go by here. Okay, the United States was thinking, well, he's going into the NATO countries as well. So this is basically the line of contention. It's right there between Belarus and Ukraine. That's where the fear is, where the NATO countries, Romania, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, which were former part of the Soviet Union, Poland especially, those countries are afraid of Russia being too close. And so they don't like that. The United States doesn't like that, as well as the other countries like Spain and the United Kingdom, because they've already committed that if Russia goes into those countries, they're going to back those countries militarily. So that is a hot spot. So the NATO countries, those 30 plus countries, are a big United States ally. Israel, another United States ally. This conflict goes back to biblical times, but Israel is right in the center of the Middle East. It is the hot spot for all the confrontation in the Middle East. As you know, Israel is a Jewish country. It's ran by Jews, but it also has Palestinians because it was formerly Palestine. Palestinians are majority Muslim. Many are Christian, though. So you have these three religions together, and there's a lot of conflict in this little bitty country. And if you look at the map, you can't see it. I put an up close picture of Israel here. You see the Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia right next door. Lebanon to the north, Syria to the north as well, Iran to the east. They're in a very difficult hot spot, and they're a very tiny country. So in terms of military spending per capita, Israel actually spends more than the United States does on military spending per capita because they are in such a vulnerable position. But this country has three major religions, and so the negotiations and conflicts and so forth are always going to be there as long as these three religions have this as a hotspot. The small geography size, I mean, you can drive around this country in a day, no problem. I mean, it's that small. And then the other countries of the Middle East surrounding it, Muslim countries surrounding a Jewish country, that is something that will always be confrontational. And that is the reason why the Middle East has always been a big part of foreign policy for the United States and will continue to be. Ukraine, as I talked about with Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine's a big ally. Now, the United States in the Ukraine-Russia war did not send troops into Ukraine because that would have been considered basically a military confrontation with Russia, and that would have carried the war probably across Europe and maybe into the United States. So that would have been a NATO confrontation. But they did send many, many weapons and many, many tools to fight that war into Ukraine. And there were billions and billions of dollars spent to supply Ukraine with the ability to properly fight Russia. So that particular conflict shows that Ukraine is a big ally of the United States. And they're a big ally because, mainly because their geographic position. They're right in between NATO countries and Russia, and they're very vital. And, there's a lot of Americans who have that connection to Ukraine that we used to label as Russia. And people like Mila Kunis from that 70s show, that actor, as an actress, she is actually Ukrainian. And there are several others that are from Ukraine. that we used to think of as Russia because they were part of the Soviet Union. But like Oksana Bayul, the figure skater, she is Ukrainian. In the same, there are others as well that are Ukrainian. Valery Borzov, who was the 1972 100-meter champion in the Olympic Games for the Soviet Union, he's actually Ukrainian. And they have adversarial relationships with Russia. They've always considered Russia an adversary. So Ukraine is now an ally since the Soviet Union broke up, and they're a very strategic ally for us. South Korea, Japan, these are our allies, and they have been. Japan since the World War II, since they surrendered to the United States in World War II, we began by taking the military out of Japan and basically protecting them ourselves. Then we allowed Japan to develop their own military. Now they have a very powerful military. South Korea, in the Korean War of the 1950s, South Korea came out as the democratic nation there. So we have a democratic nation of South Korea and Japan, and they're right there next to North Korea, Russia, and China. So they are our allies. They do depend on us a lot for protection, and our negotiations with them and our relationship with them is sometimes strained because of the conflict that they face and the threat that they constantly face. But they are very important allies for us. So Japan and South Korea is an important ally. If you look down at the bottom, there's Taiwan, that island of Taiwan. Had the privilege of going to Taiwan about a decade ago. It's a beautiful country. It's a democratic country, but it's not its own country. It's actually officially part of China. And even though it's officially part of China, the United States demands that China treat it like a democratic country, allow it to have its democracy, its free market economy, and it's had that. But China has always been a threat to that. And so there's always a worry in the United States of what China will do as far as Taiwan goes. So China, the relationship with China, culturally is very important. It's important for them to for the United States to see things from their perspective. A lot of time, a lot more than Russia. Russia with Putin, they're more of a stick out your chest kind of nation. They want to show they're powerful. They want to be respected in that way. China wants to be respected, or it's more of respect in saving face, being honorable, and so forth. They do not want to be disrespected. And China has a lot more value for economic growth and power than Russia has. China wants to be an economic power in the world, and they've adjusted their communist system to make that happen. In a lot of ways, the communist system in China is a lot like the United States now. So things have adjusted a lot in China, but the threat to democracy is constant. So for South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, these are areas in Asia that we constantly look at to make sure that they are keep their democratic status in their country and their economic status, free market economic status. That is the end of the video. I thank you for your patience. If you, like I said, this video will also have the PowerPoint attached to it for your test. I hope you do well in the test. As I always tell you, if you need me, contact me. Give me an email. I'm always happy to talk to you by phone or Zoom, or even person to person if you can make it to campus. And I will be happy to see you in the near future. Bye.